Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. My name is Jenny Whitener. I'm the CEO of Bridge Innovate. And for over 20 years, Bridge Innovate has partnered with leaders to solve problems and build leadership capabilities for their organization. This series, Leaders in the Arena, is designed to share valuable insights from our clients in our network to share as inspiration for other leaders who are engaged in the arena. Today, we're very excited to share with you a bit more about Bridge and our special guest. As I'd mentioned earlier, we're focused at Bridge around empowering teams to lead, think, and problem solve differently. And that leads me right in to our special guest today. We've got Wendy Gibson and Tom White, who'll be joining us shortly. They're going to be talking to us about adaptive leadership for growth. So as we get started, before I go into introductions and we begin with our conversation today with Tom and Wendy, wanted to just invite you all who are joining us live on the webinar. If you have questions throughout today's program, feel free to use the chat to post those questions. And as we get closer to the end of the session, we'll be sharing those questions with our guest. Also, if you just want to say hello to the other members who are joining virtually today, introduce yourself in the chat. It'd be great to know who all is with us joining live. For those who registered and are not able to join us live today, there will be a recording that will come out a bit later. It will be on the Bridge Innovate blog and on our podcast feed on Leaders in the Arena. So thank you again for joining us for Adaptive Leadership for Growth. We've had some difficulty technologically getting everybody in today, so we're going to go ahead and get started with Wendy. And then as Tom joins us, we'll be inviting him to join in the conversation. But as we get started with that, just thanking Wendy for being with us. She's recently retired from an extraordinary career at Unum, where she, in her most recent post, was Senior Vice President of Client Success. She'd been with Unum for a number of years, and in fact, she and I share a background from the University of Georgia, and so we are both Bulldog fans over the years in our history academically. But Wendy, please, let's just start with some introductions. Would you share with the group a little bit more about your background in leadership, and then we'll get into today's questions for our program.
Sure. As you said, Jenny, I am recently retired, 2 months actually. So I'm just getting the hang of this retirement thing, which is, I'm finding it pretty fun. So, but I did see over 30 years, I saw tons of change in people, process, technology, even culture, and those kind of things. So lots of changes happening, and innovation and technology certainly are a huge part of that. My professional background is, I think, somewhat unique in that I held many different roles, and I started in a financial underwriting role, which I loved, spent many years there. And then I had some leaders who actually challenged me to get out of my comfort zone and try some new things. And I moved to lead the contact centers, which couldn't be more different than underwriting, and fell in love with that and sort of larger operations. I also moved into a service operations type role, service role. And from there, I led a corporate services team, which was interesting. And to be on the corporate side of Unum, where I led facilities, aviation, travel, strategic sourcing, procurement. And then I ended my career in client success, which was probably my love of large operations and serving our clients. Mm-hmm. I've lived in Chattanooga or North Georgia for all of my life. I'm enjoying this retirement with my husband. We have 1 daughter, 3 grandchildren who we adore. And my focus in retirement is to improve my golf handicap, enjoy a slower pace of life, go on lots of travel adventures in our camper. And I'm just loving the optionality that I have every day.
Well, great. And thanks so much for joining us today to share your experience and some inspiration around leadership adaptability, just as you were just now talking about your background with Unum and all the different leadership roles you lived it, right? The different senior leadership roles that you had in your career, and how adaptive you had to be to go in, develop an understanding of the area that you've been challenged to lead, and then take that forward to achieve great things in that new role. So Talk a little bit about adaptability and why it's essential for leaders today. I mean, you've lived it, you've led it. Why is adaptability so important for leaders today?
It's a great topic, Jenny. And I would say I did have to do a lot of that adaptability because I wasn't the expert. And so really coming in to figure out things is probably the first place to start. But it's all about culture and people is a lot of things. But it is essential for leaders because things are just changing so fast, and we're dealing with people, and people bring a lot of variability to the things that we do. But leaders specifically deal with very little that is the same day to day. Whatever industry that you're in, things are always changing, and so teams look to leaders for solutions. They look to them to they sort of take their cues from their leaders on how to adapt and how to accept changes. So the ability to pivot, in my opinion, from when changes arise or be brave enough to try a new solution are really, really important, whether it's, people or processes. Being a leader who's open to collaborating versus simply managing is really where success can be achieved. And also it's where the magic is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. It's very interesting. You talked about, bravery. I think oftentimes this era of leading in a very adaptive way takes a lot of courage, where you have to go into something that's unknown.
Right.
And really through, I guess, just extraordinary curiosity, kind of like that determination, persistency, all that stuff. And like you said, collaboration, bringing in the knowledge, bringing in the skill set that you need from other leaders to make it happen. When you think about the strategies that you would sort of advocate for other leaders who are, embracing adaptability, it's happening for all of us in our marketplace today. What kind of guidance would you provide?
I think it's really important, especially whether it's a small team or a large organization. Employees have to work in an environment where they see innovation and adaptability and where they experience it. They have to see things changing and how new ideas are incorporated to feel like they're part of this culture that embraces adaptability. So if they don't see it, they're certainly not going to live it, and they're not going to buy into it. And so like you said, encouraging curiosity is huge. Highlighting, I think, really a strategy of highlighting successful change as just how business gets done. You got to celebrate your risk takers. You got to celebrate those who embrace changes, and don't forget to celebrate some failures too, because things don't always go great. You got to learn from those things and move on. Clearly communicating the why behind your actions is always top of mind, and probably the most important thing for adaptability and driving change, because you want everybody to contribute. And I would say it is just really important to go into these things to understand, not everybody is highly adaptable and loves change. And so you kind of go in with this initial set, understanding, because you do have to treat people a little bit differently. So that's one thing that I learned through many of my changes is that not everybody jumps on board all at once.
Right. I love it. Some of the things that's very interesting that you just talked about is, celebrating the risk takers. And I think often, depending on the teams that we lead, right, we think of those folks, maybe they're an irritant, or maybe it's frustrating when you have a high risk taker that's always stretching us as leaders, as managers, like they want to do something different. But just sort of what I'm hearing you say is that you have to know your team, right? You have to understand your team. How oriented to change are they? What are their natural skill sets? Are they a natural risk taker? Do they understand? But, sort of embrace that and use that to your advantage as you're leading this adaptability. And then also this concept of continuing to communicate why we're changing and getting that out front. So really helpful. Tom, welcome. So glad that you're here. I apologize for some of the technical difficulty that we had today. Just as our guests are having us join, we mentioned that we had some technical problems on the back end. So thanks so much for being here with us. Wendy and I are just getting started talking about adaptability in leadership. And as we'd had a chance to introduce Wendy. So I want to stop for a second before we continue on our conversation and get a chance to introduce Tom White, also a recently retired Senior Vice President from Unum in Investor Relations. Tom has an extraordinary background also with the company, having many, many years with the organization in really critical roles. Tom, do you want to share a little bit more about your background with folks as we we'll do that first before we
Sure.
get back into the content today?
Happy to, Jenny, and I apologize. My IT team down here in my basement kind of let me down.
No worries. We're glad you're here.
I was used to having all these people around me that could help me with this stuff, so I apologize for being late. But yeah, Jenny, you set me up well. And I guess the perspective I want to bring to our conversation is the fact that I was with the same company for my entire career, 40 years. And, you see lots of changes, certainly a lot of adapting on my part to be a part of that organization and to have some of the success that I had. But also, for much of my career, I was in kind of the same job. Now, some pieces of it changed here and there, but I was primarily working in investor relations, which meant I handled the financial communication. So, dealt with rating agencies and analysts and shareholders. And the interesting perspective that I always kind of took away is just seeing kind of the arc of the change in not only the company, but the industry that we were in my particular job, how it changed over time and how I had to adapt. And then I'd also say how I had to kind of raise the relevance of my role and try to make it more strategic as opposed to just talking to people in the outside world, but to make it strategic, make it important, and make it impactful within the company.
What I find fascinating about having both of you here today, right, is that Wendy, with multiple leadership roles in Unum, very significantly different divisions she was leading, right? You had a strong focus in investor relations for many, many years, but you were seeing input from the marketplace, from investors, asking for change, right? Asking for adaptability and navigating that relationship between push from the external side and working with an organization that's really working to be stable and risk management oriented and all those types of things. So you both bring such a different perspective coming into this conversation around adaptability.
Yeah.
Leadership. So Tom, I'm going to go to you and just ask you that, when you go through your experience and you think about leading adaptability in an organization and helping an organization be adaptable, the strategies to be adaptable. Anything you would like to share there? Wendy had just shared with us some things about making sure the whys up front, knowing your team. Anything that's important to you when you think about your role helping you adaptive?
I mean, what I tried to do is kind of bring the external perspective. I think companies can get too insular and just kind of take their own view and their own thoughts and really, I wouldn't say ignore, but just not be cognizant of how the outside world is viewing the company. And so what I would try to do is, that there's certainly the shareholders. I mean, Unum is a publicly traded company, a New York Stock Exchange traded company. So there's that part of it. But also, one of the things that I tried to do in my role and with my team is to bring in the competitor aspect. What are our competitors doing? And how can we learn from them? How can we understand what they're doing? And how does that kind of feed into the strategy of our company? So I tended to be, a little more external focused. Wendy had a wonderful career in many different areas of the company. So she's obviously much more talented than I am, that she can do all these different things. But, I'm kind of unique in the Unum world in that I found something I love to do. It fit with my background. And again, as I said, I tried to expand the role, make it more strategic, over the time I was in that job.
Right. Very interesting. When you were talking about bringing that external perspective, the market perspective to help I guess, position the company to be
Mhm.
ready for change, right? And to be adaptive. We run a simulation here at Bridge called Experience Change. It's a kind of a half-day simulation where you
Mhm.
work with a fictitious company to help create a change plan to help them get 60% buy-in. And one of the tactics, Tom, is this competitor
Mhm.
analysis and kind of disaster scenario. Like if we don't do anything, what will happen? So it's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, great point. And it comes through so often that we need that external perspective to really kind of set the energy level. We must do something about this. It's important. The market's expecting it. When you think about the biggest challenge leaders face in adapting, what is that? Why is this so hard? Why is it so hard for leaders to adapt personally and then to lead change or an
Yeah, I
organization?
think for me, it's kind of the fear of the unknown, the fear of change, and what's going to come out on the other end. And I've always thought that the more clearly that you as a leader and your team understand, what's going to be the benefit. Why do we need to do this? I think the better people understand that, the more the better their ability to adapt and to change. But I think people need to understand the why,
Mm,
and just just understanding that the world is changing. I always think of my first years with the company. There would be at 9 o'clock every morning there'd be a coffee cart that would come by, and they would literally ring a bell, and whatever you were doing, if you were in a meeting, you'd stop the meeting and you all go out and get a donut and a cup of coffee, and stuff like that doesn't happen anymore. And there's probably good reason for things like that to not happen anymore. But work changes, culture changes, and I think just kind of seeing the benefit that can come from that, the greater efficiency that can come from it is very valuable in adapting.
mhm. Right. So I'm hearing you say expect it, right? It's
Yeah.
part of the environment. Lean into it, embrace it. Wendy, what did you have anything else that you would share there about biggest challenges leaders face and adapting to complement what Tom was saying?
Well, I think Tom did a really nice job. I think he's quite talented with this. But I do think there is a lot of reluctance because change is hard. And so, sometimes when you peel back an onion, you're like, oh, what have I just opened up? But like, it's really important. But to me, I think one of the biggest challenges that leaders face is also just they don't want to introduce it. It can be hard to overcome if they're not really good open communicators who can paint a vision and tell all the why, then it's really hard. And I think part of a leader's responsibility is to understand where your deficiencies are and how do you surround yourself with people who are really good at this. But you also just got to keep practicing. You're not going to get it right every time, and so how do you kind of keep persevering and doing it better every time? When people, I think as Tom said, when people see the end state and the benefits, they will understand it. And I think as a leader, it's also important, as I said, not everybody's on the same page relative to change, but you don't have to love the change, but you do need to understand why we're changing. And I always felt like that was my responsibility, is to make sure that you understood why we were changing and that change is a constant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one other thing, Jenny, I'd throw in is change from the perspective of you're kind of on a burning bridge, a burning platform, and you need to change. And, there were times in my career where, there was the company was dealing with a lot of challenges, and so there was an obvious need to do something different, to change, to improve. And those are, those are challenging enough. But then when you get to situations where things are going well, but then you recognize that the world is changing, your market's changing, your competitors are changing. And unless you adapt and get ahead of, being in that tough situation, those can be kind of challenging because, you got employees and the team is thinking, well, hey, things are going great. Why do we need to do anything different?
Yeah.
And that's when the leader really has to step up and, paint that picture of, okay, yeah, we're doing well now, but we don't make these changes, competitors are going to catch up with us. The market's going to pass us by. Customers are going to look elsewhere, and we're going to put ourselves in a tougher situation. So it's kind of that leading while succeeding. I bet there's a book in that. How about I may write that book, Leading While Succeeding. How's that?
I love it. It's perfect. That really kind of tees me up to one of the other questions that we talked about exploring today, and it's around innovation. And because, as you said, when the platform's burning, people can say, well, go back to some of the points you've made, change is hard. And Tom's saying, we've got to lean into it. If we don't, there's risk at hand. But when things are going well, but the company needs to innovate, any suggestions there about how to equip leaders to kind of push forward with their innovation agenda to encourage change around innovation?
I'll give you a couple things. I think you've got to go back to something Tom said from an external perspective, is always bring in your customer perspective. And we should always, I think we always try to lead with a customer first orientation. And so make sure that your team members do the same thing. This isn't just leaders. We're all in this together, and your employees are closest to your customers, and they know what's working well and what's not working well. And so getting them in the know of, we have some real problems to solve, or we could do this so much better. And I think it's up to leaders to also then make sure like they are bringing forward, helping us find solutions, bringing the right people to the table to help us find the right solutions, and not just thinking, sometimes you want to think incremental and sometimes you want to think really transformational. And I think those are two different things. It's also really important in like a large operation, when you think about innovation and team stability, is you got to keep the operation running. You got to have stability. You got to maintain. You can't have everybody off trying to find the newest shiny penny. But you can also find ways to bring your employees into the conversation and keep the business moving, and finding some new ways of working. And a lot of times we spent time on creating those moments of celebration and recognition when those actions are identified and implemented. And there are also other strategies where you can pull your people off, allow them to have some skin in the game and be part of the solutioning, and then go back into the business. It's amazing how it changes their mindset to do things a little differently.
Yeah, one of the things we used to do at Unum, and this still goes on, it's a great practice. We would have a senior leadership meeting and be offsite. And, I thought one of the cool things about it is I would always invite an analyst or a shareholder in to speak to the group. And it was always a little eye-opening for some people. And as Wendy said, we would also have like an insurance broker or a customer come in to talk about, their relationship with the company. And, it wasn't always, hey, things are great. It was, yes, Unum's doing some good things, but here's what we also need to be thinking about. And it was, for me, it was a little eye-opening that, that we would have the outside perspective come in, and while we're all kind of patting ourselves on the back that we had a successful year, and to have somebody come in and maybe not throw a bucket of cold water, but maybe a little Dixie cup of cold water on us to understand that, hey, we can do better, and there's some things that we can improve on.
Very good insight. I think sometimes, and it's all in the literature, get people closer to the customer. Get them to hear the real story, authentic feedback, right there in front of the folks who are delivering the service. And we see that in the literature. Sometimes we forget as leaders that it could be that simple. And then hats off to you guys to bringing them in, and then having enough trust with your customer that they do feel that they can be very open and authentic with you, right? And with that team that you've invited them to speak with, to share candidly, like, here's what we love and here's what we'd like to see different. Here's some areas that we're really challenged with, or whatever. It's that kind of intimate, I guess, customer insight that becomes something that you can really use to drive energy around the change. So it's really, really helpful. When you think about leaders generally, and how you build this skill, how do you build this kind of leadership skill set to lead change, to be adaptive? Any suggestions there around professional development or continuous learning for leaders that want to get really good at this?
I'll give you a couple of examples or things that I would say, because we're not all born with this natural, all the skills necessary to be this adaptability, or have adaptability. Have some good mentors. test yourself with some things that you're not comfortable with, just to see the art of the possible is really important. I would say expose yourself to external sources and also your internal sources. Like I love my time in moving around to different organizations. I wasn't married to any one way of doing things. And so I did rely on relationships. So people in other organizations to help me challenge the way that we were doing things. So I kind of used all of those strategies.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'd add, push yourself, get outside your comfort zone. When I think about, in 1990, when I stepped into the investor relations role, the thought that I could get up in front of a group of mean, nasty analysts and shareholders and answer their questions without, folding like a cheap suit. I'm pretty proud that, I was able to adapt to that and make those changes, make those personal improvements, to be able to be in that kind of situation. So you have to challenge yourself. Mentor is a great thing, and I've had some wonderful people that I've worked for, respected, and a lot of them probably didn't know it, but there are things that I learned from them, and I tried to emulate and adapt in my own career.
It's very interesting. I think, earlier today, Tom, when Wendy was starting off, she was talking a little bit about bravery.
Mm-hmm.
And then hearing you talk that, you have to, really push yourself. One of the things that I'm hearing is this, and this came up from Wendy too, about self-awareness. Like be aware of where your skill sets are, be aware of where you might be feeling stretched, but then having that courage to push yourself. And then, like you said, find other support systems, whether it's a mentor, or maybe pop into an exec ed program, build some additional colleagues. Wendy, you're talking about building relationships and division leaders outside of your domain, right? Learn from others, even in your company or in your network, and have those candid conversations. Like, here's something I'm engaged with. What are you doing about something like this? What would you do in this situation? And I assume when you're talking about mentoring, Tom, those are some of the kind of conversations that you had.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Anything else that you would share with the group? I've asked, and I'll just ask again, if there are any questions from our audience today, if you want to post those in the chat as we wrap up, I'll try to get to those. But as we think about providing inspiration for other leaders in the arena, any additional insights or final advice that you would share for leaders?
Again, from my perspective, I know I'm repeating this, but just having that external perspective, understanding your market, understand your industry, what your competitors are doing, how you fit into that, and just never stop learning. Always read, always understand what other companies are doing, what other people are doing, what other executives are doing, and learn from that as best you can.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple things about don't let your biases get in your way, because everybody has a bias for different things, and we come to the table with something based on our experiences and what we know and what we don't know. Be humble enough to ask for help and to be open to listen to other ideas, because I can promise you put enough people together and the right people, you're going to get some pretty good ideas, and then you can move on from there.
Yeah.
That's been fantastic. Thank you so much for both sharing your advice today. It feels like I know that I'm going to go back to this recording when I need a little bit of inspiration and some tough challenges that I hit every day. And I hope our guests who are listening today will as well. So thank you so much for sharing your insights on adaptability and leadership. And I hope you'll come back again often on Leaders in the Arena. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Bye.